So overall, who gets more fans? Boy bands or girl bands?
Boy bands outsell girl bands by
Do they?
quite some degree.
Why is that? When it comes to the music, are there big differences between boy bands and girl bands?
Well, this is where personal opinion comes into it. I don't think, for the most part, boy bands make very good music.
When I was a teenager, I was really into Destiny's Child, the Spice Girls and Atomic Kitten. And for me, their songs were all about confidence, friendship, and about telling the world what you want, what you really, really want. But my cousin, on the other hand, she had all these boy band posters on her wall. There was Blue, there was Westlife, NSYNC, and they were all looking at her, really intense and quite topless too. And teenage Hannah developed a bit of a theory. It was that girl bands had the substance, they had the vocals, but boy bands had the cheekbones and the biceps. So was my teenage self actually right? Are girl bands better than boy bands? Well, we have been asking some of our friends around the world where they stand on this.
I think women have been really pushing the boundaries of music for the last few years and making incredible albums.
I will say the boy bands are the best, simply because they create and write songs that work for female fans like myself.
And today we're going to take you on a trip through pop history to see if we can settle this debate once and for all. I'm Hannah, this is What in the World from the BBC World Service, and we have got the BBC's music correspondent Mark Savage here in the studio with me. Hey Mark.
Hannah. I'm just surprised to learn you're not still a teenager.
Yeah, well, me too. It came as a bit of a shock, I'm afraid.
And to me.
Who are some of your favourite boy and girl bands of all time?
Good question. I mean, the original boy band is the Monkees. They were the first manufactured boy band pop group put together for a TV show in America. Probably that was the first band I was obsessed with when I was a kid. They were kooky and weird and the songs were compelling and catchy. And that kind of set me on a path. Like, I loved Duran Duran in the 1980s. And then the Spice Girls, like you, just blew me away. Girls Aloud, probably one of the most innovative pop acts of all time to come out of the UK. Just an incredibly musically adventurous band, right up to today, like Stray Kids from Korea, and it covers every genre, because like you said, you were listening to Destiny's Child, that's R&B. If you go back to the 60s, there were manufactured girl bands on Motown, like Diana Ross and the Supremes. Some of the best music has come from these bands that were literally put together in a music factory by some shady Svengali and forced in front of a microphone. I would tend to say that a stereotypical boy and girl band don't play their own instruments, they don't write their own songs, and they have been put together not just for their vocal abilities, but for how they look.
And how have boy bands and girl bands moved on from those early days? I mean, they feel like a lot slicker.
Yes. I mean, it's a big business, and it has been, I guess, since the 1980s, which is when the term boy band was really coined by the teams behind bands like New Kids on the Block. Where they were styled for MTV. Everyone had their own individual look, so every fan could choose their own favourite member. And the songs were almost secondary to the image at that point. You know, it was all about marketing. And in a way, I think boy bands in particular are a way for not just teenage girls, but predominantly teenage girls, to find their own identity through music, and also to have a safe space where they can experiment with having crushes. You know, boy bands are a picture on your wall, they're not real, you can fantasize about them and you can live out what you think a relationship might be.
Is that the same for boys? Do boys fixate on girl bands in quite the same way?
It's interesting because girl bands aren't marketed at boys. Think about, you know, the Spice Girls, Destiny's Child, Girls Aloud, the Sugar Babes, Little Mix. The principal message from all of them is about girl power, sisterhood. There was a friendship there that was almost as important as the music. And I think that's something that people really do get out of these bands, is that sense of belonging in a club.
So you've talked a bit about the marketing and how that might be different for girl groups and boy groups. When it comes to the music, are there big differences between boy bands and girl bands?
Well, this is where personal opinion comes into it. I don't think, for the most part, boy bands make very good music. I think there is a sense in which the music is an afterthought for a lot of them, where the vocals are often very strong. I mean, if you listen to NSYNC singing a cappella, incredible. Justin Timberlake, one of the best soul and R&B pop vocalists of his generation. But a lot of the songs are kind of targeted at that teen demographic. It's girl, I really love you, girl. And, you know, well,
The way
it
you
doesn't...
looked at me when you said that.
Sorry, I'm really sorry. I creeped myself out.
It gave teenage me the ick, Mark.
But that, you know, there's a lot of that, like, Colour Me Bad's I Want to Sex You Up. What a creepy song. And there's a lot of that kind of lack of substance. You know, you think of Westlife and you think of Boyzone. They are singing songs for girls to listen to with their mums. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't think it's necessarily evolutionary in a music sense. I think girl bands, because they are judged more harshly, tend to be more sonically experimental. That said, I mentioned Stray Kids too. Stray Kids are huge, like one of the biggest bands in the world right now. And they write all their own material, they produce all their own material. They've had, I think, 4 albums in the last 12 months. And they are constantly pushing new ideas, experimenting in new genres. They will tackle everything from reggaeton to EDM to almost kind of industrial pop. And everything they do comes with a bit of an edge, and I'd like to see more of that.
I hear your opinion loud and clear, Mark. We're now going to hear from some BBC reporters from around the world about what they think.
Girl groups, in my opinion, have a stronger work ethic than boy bands, and I will bring up the example of Fifth Harmony working through their pregnancy on their comeback tour. Girl bands are more emotionally regulated, so when they had a falling out like Fifth Harmony, like I said before, they quickly set her aside, and there was not really bad blood. And also, the choreography. I've not seen a girl band of yet, from Pussycat Dolls to TLC to Destiny's Child, where they are not amazing dancers. I am a huge fan of Westlife. This year was their 25th anniversary, and I was going by their stage performances, and those boys can dance.
I'm from South Korea, so K-pop girl groups really did set the standard for me. For example, Blackpink, they're one of my favorite girl groups, and they aren't just successful. I mean, they set the tone globally, from music to fashion to even internet culture. So their influence really goes just way beyond charts. So for me, girl bands tend to set the trends rather than follow them, which is why I think they win.
I will say the boy bands are the best, simply because they create and write songs that work for female fans like myself, and most of them usually do, create love songs, and I love songs.
Personally, very few boy bands bring the soul that girl bands do. When I listen to Destiny's Child, when I listen to Fifth Harmony, there's always this sort of emotion, very, very heavy emotion that comes with their music that I just tend to appreciate, right? But I would say, though, that definitely for sure, boy bands are just more popular because, it's a man's world and we all live in it.
Industry executives tend to spend more on boy bands, and I believe there's a reason for that. These executives see definitely the strong consumerism that young women and teenagers tend to express towards boy bands. And they're always fun together, just watching them dancing, doing their things together, just being brothers. For example, Backstreet Boys, Westlife in Nigeria, there's Plantation Boys, and there's P-Square. They seem to be very successful because of how they seamlessly seem to work together.
So, Mark, you mentioned the scrutiny that girl bands are under. There can be more pressure on them, and that can actually lead to different types of music coming out. Can you talk me through some of the barriers that girl bands face that boy bands might not necessarily face?
Girls are held to a higher standard. There is much more backbiting and horrible online comments. I interviewed Cat's Eye, who are one of the biggest new girl bands at the moment recently, and they told me that they've had more than 1,000 death threats.
It's shocking that musicians, that pop stars should be on the receiving end of that. I'm sure it's more common than we know about.
And I have to say, I mean, it does affect boy bands as well. There are cases in front of courts in America and in South Korea where boy band members have been defamed and accused of awful things by fans of their rivals.
Talking of the pressure and the scrutiny, on the flip side of this, are boy bands sometimes stereotyped as well and, seen to be more as heartthrobs than maybe recognised for their musical talent?
Yeah, and I think often boy bands struggle to be taken seriously because partly because their looks count against them, but also because they very rarely have control over what they're singing. And like I said before, the lyrics of what they're singing tend to lack substance. One Direction were interesting because they did kind of kick back against that a little. Liam, rest in peace, did write quite a few of their songs, as did Louis and Harry, and they rejected the idea of being overstyled, and they refused to do synchronized choreography on stage. They were a bit more loose. And that is kind of a model that I think Western boy bands in particular have looked up to. In South Korea, everything is very regimented, and the K-pop bands like BTS and 17 are groomed to within an inch of their life. But even within that, 17, Stray Kids, other bands are taking charge of their own music and their message and are starting to adopt that girl band style of singing about empowerment.
So overall, who gets more fans? Boy bands or girl bands?
Boy bands outsell girl bands by
Do they?
quite some degree.
Why is that? Because of the teenage girls? But they're both trying to get the teenage girl audience.
I think it's because often boy bands do appeal to a broader spectrum. I think you see boy bands often because their music is less edgy, it's more universal. That said, the Spice Girls are one of the biggest selling bands of all time. Destiny's Child and TLC, two of the biggest selling bands of all time. It's not a completely unfair competition, but boy bands have the edge in terms of commercial success.
Who do you think is the next big boy or girl group to look out for?
Well, I mentioned Cat's Eye. They've had an insane 2025. They had this song Gnarly that went viral. Have you heard that song?
Yeah.
I get the feeling that in the next 12 months they are going to go from being a big band in their sphere to being the world's biggest band. And the other thing that's happening is Simon Cowell, who we know was behind Little Mix and One Direction and JLS and all of the X Factor and American Idol projects, has got a new reality show on Netflix, which starts this month, December 2025, and it's putting together a new boy band. Predominantly British, I think, but with a global feel to it. Be interesting to see if he's still got the Midas touch.
Well, I'm not entirely sure we have solved this debate, but I think whichever side of the coin you're on, one thing is for sure, which is that the world would be a much sadder place if we weren't able to scream out loud for our favourite boy or girl band. Mark, thank you so much.
Thank you too. Before you go, favourite Destiny's Child song?
Oh, Jumping.
Jumping.
Yeah.
Did you not know the name, or did you just want to sing for me?
Come on, I'll do it again.
Ladies, leave your man at home.
My
Club is full of ballers and the clock is full grown.
That's it from me, but if you enjoyed this, please check out some of the other episodes that we've recorded with Mark, talking about things like whether Taylor Swift is too big to fail and how have TikTok and streaming changed pop music. You can find those wherever you get your BBC podcasts or right here on the BBC World Service YouTube channel. But don't go without letting us know, who do you think does it better? Boy bands or girl bands? I'm Hannah. This is What in the World from the BBC World Service, and we'll see you next time.